Have you ever witnessed a single oversight spiral into a catastrophe so big it grounds an entire airline buckle up? Because this story is about to take you on a turbulent ride of injustices, ignored pleas, and a shocking showdown in the sky. The main character, a determined black woman named Ebony, who only wanted safe passage on her dream vacation. Instead, she walked straight into the storm of an airline crew's indifference and paid a terrifying price for it. By the time it's over, corporate giants topple hidden prejudices, come to light, and you won't believe how far the ripple effects reach. Ebony Johnson woke up before dawn on a warm Los Angeles morning, excitement buzzing through her like an electrical current. Today was the day she would finally embark on her long-awaited trip to London, a gift to herself after years of relentless work and saving. With her large suitcase packed, Ebony took a moment to sip her coffee on her tiny balcony, letting her mind drift to the adventures that awaited her across the Atlantic, visiting the British Museum, catching a show in the West End, and simply absorbing the vibrant culture of a city she had dreamed of visiting since childhood. Though Ebony was thrilled, she was also cautious as always. She had a severe peanut allergy, something she meticulously managed in her daily life. She carried epinephrine injectors in her purse, usually kept an extra one in her backpack, and always made sure to check food labels 3 times over. If there was one thing Ebony insisted on, it was ensuring that people around her were aware of her allergy, especially on an 8-hour international flight. A single slip-up could be dangerous. She'd already informed her travel agent, who noted the severity of her condition in the flight booking. Additionally, she had called Skycraft Airlines customer service to confirm that her allergy was on record. As she arrived at Los Angeles International Airport, Ebony felt the predictable swirl of anxiety excitement and that little kernel of worry in the pit of her stomach. Airports to her were a symbol of possibility and risk simultaneously. She knew traveling was a privilege, one she did not take lightly, as she had spent countless hours working overtime to afford this special trip. Dressed in comfortable jeans and a light jacket, Ebony navigated through LAX's busy terminals. Navigating security felt routine. Remove her shoes, place her laptop in a bin, show her ID, and politely remind the TSA agent about her medical devices. Once she relaced her sneakers, Ebony double-checked her gate information on a screen overhead. Gate 67. The flight was on time. So far, so good. With her boarding pass and passport snug in her pocket, Ebony headed to the gate. The gentle hum of the airport environment, murmuring voices, rolling suitcases, and overhead announcements wrapped around her like an odd lullaby. The cautious excitement in her heart told her that this was only the beginning of her journey. Little did she know the next hours would become one of the most harrowing experiences of her life. Gate 67 was already busy when Ebony arrived. Business travelers in crisp suits tapped away on their laptops. Families wrangled restless children, and bleary-eyed tourists clutched paper coffee cups and cell phones. Ebony found a seat by the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of the plane that would carry her across the ocean. A brand-new Skycraft Airlines 787 Dreamliner gleamed in the morning light, promising a state-of-the-art flying experience, so the airline advertised. Still, Ebony couldn't shake her sense of unease. Something about the atmosphere felt off, though she couldn't put her finger on it. Perhaps it was the gate agent's hurried demeanor, or the small cluster of flight attendants gathered at the podium whispering among themselves. She overheard phrases like double seat assignments, insufficient meal variety, and overworked cabin crew. Not exactly the comforting pre-flight banter she hoped for. Determined to be proactive, Ebony approached the gate agent a harried young woman named Julie, who wore a crisp Skycraft uniform. Ebony kindly explained her peanut allergy once more and inquired if the in-flight meal would be safe for her. Julie, barely looking up from her computer, nodded absent-mindedly. Yes, it's noted. We have it in our system, she repeated. Her tone had an edge of irritation, as if Ebony was bringing up a trivial matter. She didn't pause to ask Ebony any clarifying questions or confirm the seriousness of the allergy. She simply handed Ebony back her boarding pass, with a smile so forced it barely touched her eyes. Ebony returned to her seat unconvinced. The same uneasy feeling settled in her chest like a weight. She popped open her phone to check emails. Maybe there would be something from the airline regarding her special meal request, but the only new messages were promotional offers for travel insurance and a few spam notifications. Passengers gradually lined up for the upcoming flight. Ebony noticed one of the flight attendants. Her name tag read Carol, glancing her way. Carol quickly turned back to whisper something to her colleagues, and Ebony could feel their eyes on her now and then. Was she being paranoid? Ebony had flown many times before, and she was used to the occasional stares, especially when traveling alone as a black woman. Sometimes it was curiosity. Sometimes it was more insidious. She had grown adept at ignoring it, but something about the flight crew's hush-hush manner set her nerves on edge. Soon a crackling voice announced the boarding process pre-boarding, then first class, business class, and rows from the back forward. Ebony's row was near the middle of the plane, so she settled in to wait her turn. Clutching her bag close, she took one more long glance out the window. The day was bright, the sky was calm, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was about to descend. When her zone was finally called, Ebony rose from her seat with a mix of excitement and that unsettled feeling still gnawing at her. Sliding her passport and boarding pass into the side pocket of her bag, she queued up in the aisle alongside other travelers. The line moved slowly, inching forward every few moments. People jostled with bags overhead compartments, strollers, and the usual chaos that accompanied full flights. As Ebony stepped onto the jet bridge, she was greeted by an older flight attendant, Linda, whose steel-grey hair was neatly pinned up. Linda's warm smile seemed genuine enough, and Ebony offered a friendly, "Good morning" in return. Yet as soon as Ebony mentioned her peanut allergy once more, just to be absolutely certain, Linda's expression froze into a polite mask. Yes. We have that information," Linda replied curtly. "Please take your seat." Ebony felt a flicker of irritation at the dismissiveness. She wanted to push the issue, ask more specific questions about the meal or the snack service, but the line behind her was getting impatient. She decided to wait until she was settled, then speak to a flight attendant privately. She'd done everything by the book, so she tried to reassure herself. They knew about her allergy. They'd be prepared. Right. Stepping into the cabin. Ebony was impressed by the sleek interior, wide windows, mood lighting, and extra overhead bin space. Skycraft's new Dreamliner was indeed a sight to behold. She found her row 25 and stowed her carry-on overhead before settling into the window seat. The seat itself was comfortable enough with a decent recline personal TV and even a USB port to charge her phone. Ebony sighed momentarily, allowing herself to feel excitement again. London. Just one long flight, and she'd be there. Passengers continued to trickle in, and Ebony noticed tension on the faces of the flight crew. Every so often, she glimpsed a quick exchange of words between Carol and Linda, accompanied by sideways glances in Ebony's direction. It could have been anything, maybe a seat assignment issue, or a staffing miscommunication. but Ebony's gut told her something more was brewing. She tried to focus on the positives. She had a window seat, a good book in her bag, and hours of downtime to look forward to. After years of saving for this trip, Ebony was determined not to let a few uneasy glances rattle her completely. Still, the question of her meal loomed over her. Would they serve peanuts or peanut oils in the meal? Did they plan a peanut-free snack? Ebony told herself. There was time to clarify everything once the seatbelt sign turned off. She pressed the flight attendant call button, determined to make her needs explicitly known before any food was served. Little did she know her concerns were about to be brushed off in a way that would change the course of her life and ground an entire airline in the fallout. Before the doors closed, Ebony saw Carol approaching with a forced smile. "Hello, ma'am. I noticed you used the call button. Is there anything you need?" Her tone was perfunctory, like she was reading from a script. Ebony seized the chance to discuss her peanut allergy in detail. She laid out everything: her severe reaction, the epinephrine injectors, and her request for a peanut-free meal. She also asked whether there would be any peanuts distributed as snacks to other passengers. Carol listened with stiff politeness, gave a quick, "We'll do our best," and hurried away, before Ebony could ask any follow-up questions. It was far from reassuring. As boarding wrapped up, Ebony's seatmate arrived a young man named Liam, sporting headphones around his neck and wearing a band t-shirt. He nodded in greeting and shoved his backpack under the seat. Ebony offered a polite hello. She wasn't in the mood for extended conversation, but a friendly traveling companion sometimes made the flight feel less isolating. Liam, however, seemed focused on his phone, scrolling intently. That was fine by Ebony. She had her own concerns. Soon the aircraft door was sealed, and the captain's voice crackled over the PA, announcing the flight time to Heathrow would be approximately 10 hours with the current winds. Ebony fastened her seatbelt. The usual safety demonstration began: flight attendants mechanically pointing at exits and demonstrating life vests. Ebony watched, her mind still on her allergy. She eyed Linda and Carol as they went through the motions, noticing their tight-lipped expressions and rushed manner. It was as if they had a million things on their minds, and Ebony's peanut allergy was not anywhere near the top of the list. As the plane taxied and lifted off, Ebony gripped her armrests. Normally she loved takeoffs, the rush of acceleration and the thrilling tilt into the sky. This time her heart pounded for a different reason. The flight crew's lack of acknowledgement felt like a red flag, and Ebony was all too aware that ignoring her allergy could lead to real danger. Once the seatbelt sign dimmed, Ebony watched passengers shuffle around, stretching legs or reaching for overhead bags. She debated whether to remind the flight attendants of her allergy yet again. A small voice in her head urged her to keep pushing, but Ebony also felt a tinge of worry about drawing too much attention to herself. She'd been on flights where other passengers rolled their eyes at requests like, "Please don't open peanut snacks," and in an era where passenger requests could quickly turn tense, Ebony hesitated. Still, her life depended on this. She pressed the call button again. This time, Linda emerged, looking exasperated. Before Ebony could speak, Linda said, "We're in the middle of preparing service, ma'am. Please wait until we come through the cabin." Ebony nodded, feeling a stab of frustration. She sank back into her seat. She would give them one more chance to do things correctly. If they ignored her again, she'd have no choice but to demand to speak to the head purser. A wave of turbulence jostled the plane, and Ebony gripped the armrest. Ironically, the mechanical turbulence bothered her less than the human factor, the looming sense that her needs were not being taken seriously. In just a few moments, Ebony's concerns would be horrifyingly validated in the form of a dangerous oversight that would spark a chain reaction, leading to the downfall of Skycraft Airlines. Roughly an hour into the flight, the cabin lights adjusted to a soft glow, signaling the start of the meal service. Ebony felt a mixture of relief. Finally, she could sort this out, and dread worried about how the crew would handle her special request. She noticed Carol and another attendant, Peter, moving down the aisle with carts. Trays and drinks were being distributed efficiently, but Ebony sensed a certain tension in the air, as if the crew was trying to rush through the service without any hiccups. When Carol reached Ebony's row, she handed Ebony a tray without making eye contact. Ebony immediately looked down at the small, plastic-wrapped food items. She saw a roll, a salad, a dessert cup, and an entree labeled chicken with peanut sauce. Ebony's heart lurched. Peanut sauce! She looked up at Carol, outraged and confused. "Excuse me. I have a severe peanut allergy, remember? This has peanuts in it," Ebony said, her voice tight. Carol froze for a split second before responding in a clipped tone. "We must have run out of other meal options. This is all we have. Are you sure you can't just move it aside?" Ebony's jaw dropped. It was as if she was speaking to a customer service robot stuck on autopilot. But Ebony was no robot. This was her life and safety. "I can't have this on my tray. I can't risk cross-contamination," Ebony explained, trying to maintain her composure despite her frustration. "Could you at least find me a different meal, or ask the galley if they have anything else?" Carol glanced around, clearly annoyed. The line of trays behind her was piling up. Passengers around Ebony were beginning to stare. Carol let out a sigh. "I'll check in the back," she conceded, before yanking the tray away. Liam looked at Ebony, eyebrows raised as if to say, "Wow." At that moment, Linda bustled over asking Carol what the hold-up was. Carol muttered something about someone refusing their meal, which made Ebony bristle. She repeated her allergic condition, but Linda just nodded mechanically, as though Ebony had spoken in some foreign language she didn't care to understand. Ebony felt humiliated and angry, a flush creeping over her cheeks. She'd done everything she was supposed to do, declared her allergy reminded them multiple times, and they were acting like it was a minor inconvenience. Soon Carol returned with a different entree. She thrust the tray at Ebony. "This one's vegetarian," she said curtly. Ebony inspected it, relieved to see no mention of peanuts. She thanked Carol, trying to remain polite, but Carol just shrugged and moved on to Liam's tray, rolling her eyes as she did so. Ebony heard her whisper to Peter, "I can't deal with this right now," while Peter just gave a tight-lipped shake of his head. Little did Ebony know the tray wasn't the real issue. The problem was bigger and far more insidious than a single meal. The flight crew's negligence and disregard were about to manifest in ways that would put Ebony's very life in danger. Ebony managed to pick through the vegetarian meal carefully. She examined every component, reading ingredient labels on packaging wherever possible. She sensed a few curious glances from nearby passengers, but she carried on, determined to keep herself safe. Despite her frustration, Ebony tried to push back her anger and concentrate on simply getting through this flight. To her relief, the main entree, some sort of pasta with tomato sauce, appeared safe. She ate slowly, cautious of any potential cross-contamination. Meanwhile, the cabin bustled with the typical mid-flight rhythms overhead, reading lights, clicking on people, asking for water or tea flight attendants, pushing carts. Yet Ebony noticed how the flight attendants, especially Carol, seemed to avoid eye contact with her. At one point, Ebony overheard Linda and Carol chatting in the galley, just a few rows behind her. "I'm telling you, we did everything we could," Carol said, exasperation lacing her voice. "She shouldn't have booked if she's that sensitive. We can't police every passenger's snacks." Linda's response was more muted. Ebony couldn't catch every word, but she heard something about just get through the flight. Clearly, they didn't expect Ebony to overhear them. Ebony's stomach twisted, anger and humiliation vying for dominance. She was no stranger to microaggressions and dismissive attitudes, but hearing such blatant disregard for her life-threatening allergy and the insinuation that her presence was the problem felt like a slap in the face. Ebony took a deep breath, determined not to let them see her rattled. She reminded herself of her rights as a passenger. She'd read the guidelines on the Federal Aviation Administration FAA website before booking the ticket. Airlines were obligated to address severe allergy concerns, especially if the passenger had notified them well in advance. And Ebony had done exactly that. Checking her watch, Ebony noted there were still many hours to go. She decided that if any peanut snacks were distributed to passengers, she'd have no choice but to demand the entire row be a peanut-free zone. She debated whether to speak to the head purser directly, but she wasn't sure who it was. Carol or Linda or someone else. She silently wished for a flight attendant with empathy and a sense of responsibility, someone who could grasp the seriousness of her situation. As Ebony finished her meal, she recalled the times she had spoken up in situations of injustice, whether it was in her workplace or in social settings. She'd learned that staying silent often meant complicit acceptance of mistreatment. This time, however, her life was on the line. She resolved that if the crew continued to ignore or dismiss her pleas, she would escalate. She wouldn't be bullied into silence, not over something as crucial as her health. What Ebony couldn't anticipate was just how catastrophic the crew's negligence would become. Before long, they'd bypass not only courtesy, but every standard safety protocol, unleashing a wave of events that would endanger everyone on board. 2 hours passed uneventfully, giving Ebony a false sense of relief. She watched a movie, occasionally sipping water to stay hydrated. The plane soared smoothly over the Midwest, heading toward the Atlantic crossing. A half-dozen rows behind Ebony, a baby wailed intermittently, but otherwise the cabin was quiet. Some passengers dozed with their seat backs reclined while others browsed the in-flight entertainment. Then Ebony noticed the flight attendants preparing a snack service. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw them lugging large plastic bags, presumably filled with packets of pretzels or peanuts. She craned her neck to get a better look, her pulse racing. Was the airline about to hand out peanuts to everyone on board? Despite her explicit warnings, Carol and Peter started at the front of the cabin, handing small foil packets to each row. Ebony's concern intensified as she spotted a peanut icon on the packets. Indeed, it looked like peanuts were in the mix. Ebony's chest tightened. With an allergy as severe as hers, the risk went beyond ingestion. Airborne peanut particles or traces on surfaces could trigger a reaction if she wasn't careful. She pressed the call button urgently. No one came for minutes. The flight attendants were busy distributing the snacks. Ebony's anxiety spiked. Finally, she waved down a passing attendant, one she hadn't seen before, named Marcus, and tried to explain her situation. Marcus looked startled, muttered something about checking, and disappeared. As Carol approached with the snack cart, Ebony raised her voice slightly to ensure she was heard. "I have a severe peanut allergy. I mentioned it multiple times. This snack distribution is dangerous for me. Could you please skip handing peanuts to the rows around me?" Carol's expression hardened. "We can't deny service to the other passengers," she snapped. "We only have peanuts and pretzels. If they want peanuts, they're entitled to them. You can take precautions if you need." Ebony's face flushed. She could feel stares from passengers around her. Some looked sympathetic, others annoyed. "Please," Ebony insisted, her voice trembling with frustration. "I've done everything to notify you about my allergy. You're going to put my life in danger." Carol's only response was a shrug. Then she whispered under her breath, "Some people just want special treatment." Ebony heard it, and her blood boiled. This was more than negligence. It was blatant discrimination and disregard. Liam stepped in quietly, voicing support. "She's literally saying she could die if she's exposed to peanuts. This is serious." Carol sighed loudly and rolled the cart forward. Marcus followed, handing Ebony a packet of pretzels. "I tried," he mouthed apologetically. Ebony clutched the pretzels, her hands shaking, wishing the crew would grasp the gravity of the situation. But it was clear that only an actual emergency would get them to pay attention, and that was precisely what was about to unfold. Not long after the peanut packets were distributed, Ebony's heart hammered. The pungent, distinctive smell of peanuts started to permeate the cabin. She could see other passengers tearing open the shiny wrappers and popping peanuts into their mouths. Some had the courtesy to glance at Ebony apologetically, but most were oblivious. Her row partner, Liam, had declined the peanuts in solidarity. But Ebony's mind raced with the knowledge that dust and allergens could spread through the air or linger on surfaces. She kept her inhaler and epinephrine injector within arm's reach, bracing herself for the worst. For the next half hour, Ebony breathed carefully, trying not to panic. The crew made no announcements about allergies, no request for passengers to refrain from consuming peanut products. Nothing. Then Ebony felt an uncomfortable tightening in her throat and an itchiness around her lips. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and her pulse felt rapid uneven. A wave of dread washed over her. She'd been in controlled environments with peanut exposures before, but never confined in a pressurized metal tube at 35,000 feet. She fumbled for her epinephrine pen, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "Are you okay?" Liam asked, genuine concern etched across his face. Ebony tried to answer, but her voice sounded strangled. Panic flared in her eyes. She pressed the call button, but no one responded immediately. Her throat constricted further, and she struggled for breath. This was it. She was going into anaphylactic shock. Liam jumped up and flagged down Linda, who approached with visible annoyance. "She's having an allergic reaction," Liam exclaimed, pointing to Ebony, who was now gasping for air. Linda's eyes widened, and she reached for the cabin phone, paging for medical assistance. Ebony managed to self-administer her epinephrine, jabbing the pen into her thigh. The seconds stretched painfully, each ragged breath feeling like a battle. Passengers nearby scrambled to help. A doctor traveling with his family hurried over, instructing Ebony to keep calm and breathe slowly while rummaging through his own medical kit. Ebony's body trembled as the adrenaline from the epinephrine surged. Her lips tingled and her vision blurred at the edges, but she fought to remain conscious. Carol appeared, eyes darting anxiously from Ebony to the small cluster of onlookers. She offered no apology, only a terse inquiry. "Is there anything we can do?" The doctor requested oxygen and demanded to know if they had any additional epinephrine on board. Linda hurried off to rummage through the emergency medical kit. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Fear rippled through the passengers. This was a life-threatening emergency, one that Ebony had tried desperately to avoid. As Ebony clung to consciousness, her mind flickered with anger, fear, and a desperate hope that she wouldn't die here in a cramped seat surrounded by peanuts. She'd tried so hard to prevent this. The unstoppable chain of negligence seemed to have led her right to this terrifying moment, and now the flight crew had no choice but to face the consequences. The moment Ebony's anaphylaxis became evident, the flight crew scrambled into action. The pilot was notified of a medical emergency, and he immediately contacted air traffic control. Despite the carefully plotted route to London, they had no choice but to divert for an emergency landing. The nearest major airport with the facilities to handle a critical medical incident was Denver International. Over the intercom, the captain's voice reverberated with urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical emergency on board. We will be making an unscheduled landing in Denver. Please remain calm and follow all instructions from the cabin crew." The announcement sent a ripple of confusion and concern through the passengers. Some craned their necks toward Ebony's row, where the doctor and attendants tried to stabilize her. Ebony's skin was clammy, and her breathing was labored. The epinephrine injection had helped, but she still wasn't out of danger. The doctor advised that she likely needed additional treatment, perhaps another dose of epinephrine, and definitely medical supervision on the ground. Carol and Linda looked shaken, their hurried steps betraying their earlier dismissive attitudes. The gravity of the situation was undeniable. Now Ebony was in critical condition, and their negligence had played a direct role in putting her there. Linda retrieved the emergency oxygen tank, carefully positioning the mask over Ebony's face. Carol fumbled with a second epinephrine auto-injector from the airline's emergency kit. Up in the cockpit, the pilot initiated a rapid descent. Flight attendants rushed through the cabin, ensuring everyone was buckled in and the aisles were clear. The plane rocked gently as it changed course, drawing nearer to Denver. The overhead lights flickered slightly, amplifying the tension. Ebony fought to maintain consciousness, her vision narrowing as the shortage of oxygen in her system took its toll. As the plane descended, minutes felt like hours. Ebony vaguely registered Liam's hand on her shoulder, his anxious face hovering in her peripheral vision. She clung to that anchor of human kindness in a storm of fear. The flight crew's chatter buzzed around her, punctuated by the doctor's instructions. "We need paramedics on the ground immediately. She's still not fully stabilizing." Finally, through the haze, Ebony felt the aircraft's wheels touch the runway. The screech and rumble of landing jolted her body. Relief and terror swirled together. Relief that she was on the ground. Terror that she might not get to see what happened next. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows as emergency vehicles raced down the tarmac to meet the plane. The door opened, and paramedics rushed in with a stretcher guiding Ebony out and into the care she so desperately needed. A hush fell over the passengers, many of whom were visibly shaken. They had just witnessed a near-death crisis mid-flight. What none of them realized yet was that this emergency landing would spark an inquiry so intense it would bring the entire airline to its knees. As the paramedics whisked Ebony away to a waiting ambulance, the atmosphere in the cabin was thick with tension and fear. Flight attendants tried to maintain composure, going through the usual post-landing procedures, but their faces betrayed shock. Passengers murmured among themselves, some on the verge of tears, others furious at the airline's apparent negligence. Liam was among the last to disembark, shaken by the ordeal, but determined to see if Ebony would pull through. A paramedic at the bottom of the jetway directed him to the hospital in downtown Denver, where Ebony was being transported. Meanwhile, Chaos reigned at the gate. Skycraft Airlines ground staff flooded the area, frantically fielding questions from passengers who were now stranded in Denver. Officials from the airport and local media outlets were alerted to the emergency landing. Cameras flashed as reporters tried to piece together the story. Someone overheard a passenger exclaim, "She told them she was allergic. She told them multiple times." The comment spread like wildfire, fueling speculation that Ebony's brush with death was due to gross negligence. Behind the scenes, Skycraft's corporate offices went into crisis mode. Emails and phone calls bounced between Denver and the airline's headquarters on the East Coast. The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, was notified of the medical emergency and the diversion as per protocol. But soon the story took on a sharper edge. Flight logs indicated Ebony had pre-notified the airline about her severe peanut allergy. Witness statements suggested crew indifference or even hostility. This wasn't just a bad situation, it was a legal and PR nightmare waiting to erupt. In the hospital, Ebony regained consciousness hours later, disoriented and fatigued. Her throat felt raw, her body weak from the anaphylactic shock. But she was alive. The local doctor in Denver explained she'd be monitored overnight, given additional antihistamines and possibly steroids to curb any secondary reaction. Ebony's mind swirled with confusion and anger. She recalled the dismissive attitude of the cabin crew, how they'd served peanuts despite her explicit warnings. And she remembered Carol's cold shrug, as if Ebony's life-threatening condition was nothing more than an inconvenience. Liam stopped by to check on her. She offered him a grateful, albeit weary, smile. "They almost killed you," he said, softly, shaking his head in disbelief. Ebony didn't have the energy to respond, but her eyes, dark with both exhaustion and determination, spoke volumes. She was resolved that this wouldn't be swept under the rug. Someone had to be held accountable. In the coming days, Ebony would come face to face with a flurry of media attention, a battery of legal entanglements, and a fight for justice that would reach far beyond her personal ordeal. The flight may have landed, but the real turbulence was only just beginning. Word of Ebony's harrowing experience exploded on social media within hours of the emergency landing. Passengers on the flight posted tweets and Facebook updates, recounting the horrifying moment they watched Ebony struggle to breathe. They tagged Skycraft Airlines, calling out the flight crew's blatant disregard of Ebony's severe allergy. As Ebony rested in the hospital, her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, texts, calls, and social media pings. Family and friends from back home had seen the news break on Twitter under hashtags like #Skycraft Allergy Scandal and Justice for Ebony. Local reporters camped outside the hospital, hoping to catch a statement. Ebony, still groggy and unsettled, declined interviews at first. She wanted to make sure she fully understood her rights and her next steps. At the same time, her emotions churned with a desire for the truth to be heard. The nurse assigned to Ebony marveled at the stream of visitors, lawyers, activists, and supporters who came to check on her. One of the visitors was an old friend from college, now working as a civil rights advocate with the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU. Over cups of lukewarm hospital coffee, Ebony recounted every detail, the repeated notifications about her allergy, the dismissive remarks, the distribution of peanuts that could have killed her. Her friend took detailed notes, appalled at the depth of negligence. Meanwhile, Skycraft Airlines released a brief statement online expressing regret for the unfortunate incident and claiming they were conducting an internal investigation. The statement read cold and clinical, and it set off yet another wave of outrage. One passenger who had filmed part of the exchange between Ebony and Carol on her smartphone posted the video online. In the clip, Carol's dismissive shrug and the phrase, "If they want peanuts, they're entitled to them," were crystal clear. Sympathy for Ebony surged, and condemnation of Skycraft was swift. Television networks picked up the story. CNN ran a short segment showing the viral video and highlighting Ebony's precarious condition. Experts discussed how airlines were supposed to handle severe allergies. A spokesperson from the FAA was interviewed stating that federal guidelines emphasized cooperation and precaution when a passenger discloses a life-threatening allergy. As the social media firestorm raged, Ebony realized this issue was bigger than her single flight. Many others chimed in with their own experiences of airlines dismissing or mishandling medical conditions. The conversation was no longer just about Ebony's near-death experience. It was about a systemic lack of empathy and accountability in commercial aviation. Within days, Ebony found herself at the epicenter of a battle that would soon shake Skycraft Airlines and the entire industry to its core. Skycraft Airlines' meager public relations damage control did little to quell the growing outrage. By the time Ebony was discharged from the hospital, public sentiment had swung heavily in her favor. Civil rights organizations, disability advocates, and consumer protection groups called for a thorough investigation. Under increasing pressure, the Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) announced they would launch a formal inquiry into Skycraft's handling of medical disclosures and emergency protocols. Skycraft's corporate headquarters became a hive of frantic activity. Executives fired off emails instructing employees to preserve flight records, communications logs, and any relevant documentation. Internal memos hinted at attempts to shift blame. Some suggested Ebony hadn't clearly stated the severity of her allergy. Others suggested the flight attendants were understaffed and overwhelmed. But the passengers' testimonies and Ebony's booking records told a different story. A team of investigators arrived at Skycraft's offices, armed with legal authority, to review flight logs, crew training materials, and any email correspondence relating to Ebony's flight. They interviewed employees from the gate agent Julie to the flight attendants, Carol, Linda, Marcus, and Peter. Each offered their account, but discrepancies quickly surfaced. Carol insisted she tried to accommodate Ebony, but multiple passengers recalled Carol's dismissive comments. Linda attempted to downplay the emergency, yet the pilot's official statement made it clear Ebony's reaction was deemed life-threatening. Meanwhile, Ebony retained legal counsel. Her attorney, Sharon Lee, was known for her expertise in aviation-related personal injury cases. In preparation for a potential lawsuit, Sharon gathered all the evidence, Ebony's medical records, eyewitness statements, and any documented attempts Ebony made to alert the airline about her allergy. The mountain of proof was damning. Sharon reminded Ebony, though, that justice could be a drawn-out process. These corporations have deep pockets and teams of lawyers, she explained gently. They'll try to discredit you if they can, but from what I see here, they're going to have a hard time doing that. In parallel, Ebony received an outpouring of support from people all over the world: letters, emails, social media messages. A few detractors questioned whether Ebony was exaggerating, but the overwhelming majority sided with her. Hashtags calling for boycotts of Skycraft Airlines trended for days. Activists organized small protests outside some of the airline's hubs, holding signs that read, "Passengers before profits and allergies are real Skycraft." As the weeks wore on, the FAA's preliminary findings began to leak. Rumors suggested that not only did Skycraft fail to follow allergy protocols, but certain staff members displayed discriminatory attitudes toward Ebony, If proven true, that could lead to massive fines, or even a temporary grounding. For Ebony, the question was no longer whether justice would come, it was how profoundly it would reshape the entire airline industry. The lawsuit hit like a thunderclap. On a stormy morning in Denver, Ebony and her legal team filed an official lawsuit against Skycraft Airlines. The charges were damning gross negligence violation of the Air Carrier Access Act, ACAA, and racially biased treatment in the handling of a life-threatening medical condition. At a packed press conference outside the courthouse, Ebony stood beside her lawyer, Sharon Lee, and delivered a firm message to the nation. "I'm not here to destroy anyone," Ebony said calmly, her voice unwavering. "I'm here because I nearly died for simply asking to be safe. If we don't hold people accountable, who will?" News outlets from CNN to the New York Times splashed Ebony's statement across their headlines. Activist groups flooded social media with support. Hashtags like Ebony v. Skycraft and Allergy Justice now trended for days. Inside Skycraft's legal department, panic brewed. Lawyers were summoned into emergency meetings. Executives tried to strategize damage control, but it was too late. Ebony's team had filed a motion for public trial, not arbitration. This would be fought in full view of the public eye. Skycraft's official response came within 48 hours. It was cold, calculated, and filled with legalese. Skycraft Airlines maintains it followed all applicable procedures and denies any wrongdoing. "We regret the incident, but assert that our crew acted in good faith and within industry standard." But Ebony's team came armed with evidence recorded, witness accounts, internal flight communications, and most damning of all footage showing Carol's dismissive shrug and the now infamous words, "If they want peanuts, they're entitled to them." As the discovery phase unfolded, Skycraft's defenses began to crumble. Internal emails revealed that Ebony's allergy notification had in fact been flagged in the system multiple times, first by the booking agent, then by customer service, and finally at the gate. One middle manager forwarded the allergy alert with a note, "We get these all the time. If we cater to one, we'll have to cater to everyone. Just follow standard meal protocol." That line alone would become Exhibit A in what the media dubbed the case that grounded an airline. Worse still, crew schedules showed that the flight attendants on Ebony's plane had been shuffled last minute, leaving the team short-staffed and undertrained. One of them, Peter, even admitted during his deposition that he hadn't received updated training on handling in-flight allergy cases in over 2 years. "We were told to keep the flight moving and avoid delays," he said. In court, the preliminary hearings were tense. Ebony sat at the front row beside her attorney, while Skycraft's legal team, polished, pale, and visibly flustered, argued to have parts of the evidence sealed. But the judge denied their request. "This case has substantial public interest," he said. "Transparency serves justice." The courtroom itself became a battleground for truth. Reporters lined the benches. Protesters and supporters gathered outside, holding signs that read, "Passengers deserve protection and no more excuses." Skycraft. Ebony's testimony was the centerpiece. Calm and comsooled, she recounted the horror of that flight. The ignored warnings, the smell of peanuts wafting through the air, the constriction in her throat, the silence when she pressed the call button, and the moment she thought she was going to die. I told them, again and again, and they looked at me like I was being dramatic, like my life wasn't worth the inconvenience. There was a pause in the courtroom, so complete one could hear a pen drop. Skycraft's lead attorney, Robert McNally, attempted to cross-examine with a focus on technicalities. "Ms. Johnson, you didn't speak directly with the pilot about your allergy. Why not take it upon yourself to ensure someone in command knew Ebony's reply was swift and biting? I followed every rule. I disclosed my condition during booking, called your customer service, spoke to your gate agent, and 2 flight attendants. You want to blame me for your system failing 6 times? McNally turned red. The gallery murmured. Outside the courthouse, Sharon Lee addressed the press. This case is about much more than peanuts. It's about basic human dignity, medical responsibility, and whether corporations value human lives over convenience. Our client was nearly killed because a billion-dollar airline thought her life was negotiable. The courtroom sketches of Ebony, stoic, powerful, refusing to back down, went viral. Young girls with food allergies, black women who had experienced bias, and passengers with disabilities all saw something in her fight. Ebony received thousands of letters, stories of discrimination, illness, and being ignored. Meanwhile, Skycraft's public image spiraled. Stockholders began pressuring the board for leadership changes. Whispers of executive resignations circulated. The airline's social media accounts became war zones, with thousands of people commenting, "Never flying Skycraft again. Boycott Skycraft." How many people have to nearly die before they care? A month into the proceedings, Skycraft's legal team made an offer a private settlement worth several $1,000,000 in exchange for Ebony's silence. The offer was tempting. Ebony could finally rest afford anything she ever dreamed of. But she said no. "If I settle quietly," Ebony explained to her legal team, "they'll just go back to business as usual. They'll bury it like they always do." Instead, she demanded policy reform, mandatory annual allergy safety training, cabin-wide disclosure requirements, real-time allergen tracking in the meal system, and a public apology. Skycraft refused. The trial moved forward. In cross-examinations, Carol faltered. "I didn't mean to be rude," she said on the stand, fidgeting. "We were under a lot of pressure that day. Short-staffed. I didn't think it would be that serious." "Did you think she was faking it?" Sharon asked. "No, I didn't know what to do. That's the problem," Sharon replied, voice sharp. "You didn't know, and instead of asking, you shrugged." Public sentiment continued to shift. News anchors called the trial a reckoning for corporate accountability. Commentators noted that Ebony's fight had now reached beyond aviation into civil rights and disability rights. By the time closing arguments were delivered, the pressure on Skycraft was so immense, insiders claimed board members were preparing for a contingency bankruptcy filing. Ebony's final courtroom statement was brief but unforgettable. "I didn't ask for special treatment. I asked to live. Every passenger deserves that right, no matter their race, medical condition, or seat number." She sat down. The gallery erupted in applause, despite the judge's gavel trying to restore order. But no one in that courtroom would forget what came next. Because just as the legal proceedings were nearing a verdict, the FAA issued an unthinkable ruling. Skycraft Airlines would be grounded indefinitely. The reason their failure to address systemic safety violations revealed during Ebony's trial. What started as one woman asking for a peanut-free meal ended with the collapse of an airline empire and a message heard around the world. Amid the intensifying legal battle, the FAA delivered its final investigative report, and it was devastating for Skycraft Airlines. The agency found clear evidence of systemic issues, inadequate training regarding medical accommodations, contradictory policies on peanut distribution, and alarmingly a culture of disregard for passenger well-being. The FAA cited multiple prior complaints, where passengers with allergies or disabilities felt ignored or discriminated against. Ebony's near-death incident was merely the catalyst that brought it all to a head. In an unprecedented move, the FAA announced the revocation of Skycraft's operating certificate, pending a complete overhaul of its safety and customer care protocols. Effectively, this meant Skycraft Airlines was grounded, unable to operate flights until it proved it could meet strict new standards. It was a thunderous moment in aviation history. Rarely did the FAA take such a harsh measure, reserved only for the most egregious violations of public safety. The news reverberated across the industry. Competitor airlines scrambled to accommodate stranded Skycraft passengers, while travel agents raced to rebook thousands of flights. Skycraft employees, pilots, flight attendants, ground staff, found themselves in limbo. Unsure whether the airline would recover or fold under the weight of lawsuits and massive financial loss. The airline's stock plummeted to record lows. Within days, it was delisted from the major exchanges. Inside Skycraft's headquarters, panic reigned. Top executives stepped down or were fired. The board of directors brought in crisis management teams to salvage what little they could. But the damage was too vast. Not only did the airline face Ebony's lawsuit, which gained even more strength from the FAA's findings, but it also faced a slew of additional suits from past passengers emboldened to speak out about similar mistreatment. Meanwhile, Ebony's name became synonymous with airline accountability. Consumer advocacy groups praised her courage for refusing an easy settlement. For Ebony, the moment was bittersweet. She felt vindicated that regulators and the justice system finally recognized the dire seriousness of her case. Yet she also empathized with the many employees, people with families caught in the crossfire of corporate negligence. If Skycraft ever hoped to fly again, they would have to reinvent themselves entirely, from leadership to policies, from staff training to the fundamental ethos of customer care. Televised coverage of the FAA press conference concluded with the agency spokesperson stating, "Passenger safety is our utmost priority." When an airline consistently fails to address grave safety concerns, we have no choice but to ground their operations. It is our hope that Skycraft Airlines will use this time to rectify systemic failures and ensure that incidents like Ms. Johnson's never occur again. In that moment, Ebony realized she had become part of a broader fight for civil rights, for disability rights, for the fundamental principle that no one should be cast aside by those entrusted with their safety. What began as a horrifying mid-flight crisis had sparked a movement that would reshape the airline industry's approach to passenger welfare forever. Ebony's lawsuit became a turning point not only for her life, but for the entire airline industry. After nearly losing her life at 35,000 feet, she stood firm in demanding accountability. What began as one woman's desperate plea for safe travel ended with a powerful message: negligence and discrimination have no place in the skies. By the time the dust settled, Skycraft Airlines was a cautionary tale, forced to rebuild from the ground up. Other carriers took note, scrambling to update their policies, training, and overall approach to passenger needs. For Ebony, the journey was physically and emotionally draining. Yet she emerged triumphant, a beacon of hope for anyone who's ever been ignored, undermined, or discriminated against. Her story reminds us that no one is just a passenger. We are all deserving of respect, dignity, and protection, and it's up to each of us to demand nothing less. If you found Ebony's story inspiring, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to this channel. By doing so, you help spread awareness of critical consumer and civil rights issues, and you empower the next person who might face a similar struggle. Let's keep this conversation alive and hold every service provider accountable for treating passengers with the respect and care they deserve. Thank you for watching, and stay safe out there.